Welcome to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Elkins-Hetton, Director of Investor Education here at PassiveInvesting.com. And I'm so excited to be joined today by Nick Stageberg. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks, Whitney. It's an honor to be here with you.
Well, excellent. So before we dive in to this very unique deal, Colby Manor, 34 units in Rochester, Minnesota, tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got into multifamily real estate and where you're at today.
Sure. So I own and manage Black Swan Real Estate and Black Swan Living Property Management with my wife, Elaine. We're both kind of full partners in the business. I started out, I have a bachelor's degree in computer science and a bachelor's degree in ministry. Had the great privilege to lead a couple of very successful tech startups, and then kind of felt like I had maybe achieved everything I could achieve there. And then this real estate thing is kind of our next big startup. We kind of apply all the things that Elaine learned from her career in medicine. She's a Mayo Clinic trained physician, and I learned in the whole technology world to real estate. And so we have about $1/3 billion in assets under management today, very vertically integrated with we own the property management company, the cleaning company, the maintenance company. We do everything we can in-house. We've got about 50 staff members here in Rochester, about 30 staff members in Tacoma, Washington.
That's amazing. Yeah. And Elaine and I know each other very well. So I'm so excited for the show to get to highlight you, but also this upcoming project that you guys have. You guys closed on it in April, Colby Manor, 34 units in Rochester, Minnesota. Well, so since we already know it closed in April, what did you purchase it for? And, I know it's going to be, it is multifamily, but this is a unique one. I'm interested to dive into the business plan here.
Yeah, this is a super unique property. It's one that I love to talk about. Like I think on a lot of podcasts, you might hear about a typical, bread and butter deal. It's a B class, 100 units. We got a Freddie Mac loan or whatever. So this is a D class asset. Not D is in dog. This is a knockdown. It's located in an extremely high end area, 1968 build. So kind of the charmless mid-century, garden style apartment builds. Not a whole lot you can do to make them that beautiful on the outside, but they're kind of built like tanks. Up north, we don't have issues with chillers, so they actually can be like really solid properties. There's not as many capex issues up here, though they're flat roofs. You have issues there. This particular one, it's two 16-unit apartment buildings that were probably originally like an extended stay hotel back in the day. So really modest kind of micro units, and then it came with 2 parcels and 2 single family homes. So it was actually sold as like a piece of redevelopment dirt. It has really favorable zoning in a really good location. And then I would say we kind of paid the price for the dirt and got some free apartment buildings along the way. The asking price was $2.65 million, which ended up being our contract price. We ended up closing at $2.413 million. So we got some concessions through the due diligence process there, and this hit our radar because we had a great relationship with the lender. This is a great pro tip for anyone out there. Lenders are often also trustees. So the owner of this apartment building passed away, and his estate went into trust managed by the lender. And we're always reaching out to lenders saying, hey, do you have anything on your books you'd like to get off your books, or opportunities that we should know about? If we happen to come to own it, it's your business to lose from a lending perspective. And lenders bring us deals all the time. And this one, they said, yeah, we have an apartment building in trust that will hit the market soon. We'll go ahead and put you in touch with the broker, so you kind of have an inside track there. Ultimately went to market. There was one other buyer in the mix there, but we had a pretty huge kind of head start on everyone else. And one pro tip for anyone out there looking at buying something in trust is that there's usually a fiduciary involved, a trustee that has an obligation to do what appears to be the best thing on paper, but may not be logically connected to reality. So they'll almost always get an appraisal, and they need to sell that building for that appraised price. Doesn't matter how that appraised price was determined, doesn't matter what market conditions are. So you can buy it for above or below market price. As long as it matches appraised price, they're fine. So they appraised it at a certain value, and we had to make sure that they got that appraised value no matter what.
All right. So for those people who don't understand this whole process on how properties go into trust, can you just take like 60 seconds and help listeners understand what exactly happened here since the property didn't go to heirs, but it went to the lender in trust?
Exactly. So if you own some real estate and you pass away and you don't have a living trust, your property will go through probate, which is a really messy, awful process. So anyone out there, if you don't have a trust, you need to set one up. If you own any real estate at all, you need to set one up. It costs just a few $1,000s for a basic trust, and that keeps your property out of the probate process. Especially with rental real estate, the majority of the wealth that you've created for your heirs can be lost in the blink of an eye going through that probate process. Imagine if your tenants don't know where to send rent and maintenance tickets don't get answered. Even if you have a third-party property management company, if they don't know how to get more money if they need it or to where to send the money, things can go off the rails very quickly. So if you pass away and you have a trust, your assets are held in trust, and there's typically some instructions about what to do with your asset, typically to sell it. And the trustee, it's often a bank. There's typically a professional trustee, but it could be a person, hopefully someone who has some competence in administrating a piece of commercial real estate or a single family home or something like that. They typically have a legal obligation to go, essentially liquidate that asset for what an appraiser might say it's worth, kind of independent of what prevailing market conditions may actually be. So these are always huge acquisition opportunities because you have a somewhat disinterested third party. They're not necessarily interested in like maximizing sales price. They need to be able to say, I did everything I could to get what it was worth according to appraisal. And then that's it. That's kind of where their obligation ends. So that's typically how that process works. And we buy quite a few properties that have gone through the probate process or are held in trust.
Interesting. Such an interesting tactic. There for a while, I was buying properties from people that were going through probate. This is single family in the Midwest. Just because the property passed on to somebody who had no working knowledge on how to operate the property, and I was like, okay, let's create a win-win situation here for everybody. So I love
Exact
that
same thing.
strategy. Yeah, I love that strategy. Okay, so when did this come on your radar? And when did how did you get it under contract? Like, how did you win that contract? Because it sounded like you had a little bit of competition.
Yeah, so this has been on our radar for quite some time. So the owner passed away, and we have a database that we personally maintain of every apartment building that we might potentially want to buy. It's an enormous database, and we go through and check property ownership records on a routine cadence. And CoStar and other databases are not necessarily as up to date as you think they might be. So we might have a virtual assistant based in the Philippines or whatever, and go through and then just let us know if anything has changed in those ownership records. So this popped up on our radar as, hey, this used to be owned by XYZ person, and now it's owned by a trust. There's a trustee deed that will transmit that, and you'll see that in the land deed title records. So this happens all the time. It's a perfectly normal thing, and if someone has a trust set up, that means that they had their ducks in a row. But it means it's extremely likely that asset is going to sell in the near future. Typically, when it goes into trust, it's going to be liquidated at some time in the near future. And we did a little bit of research and eventually found out that the trustee was a bank, a very large regional bank that we have a fantastic relationship with. I reached out to our banker and said, hey, I noticed that this thing has transitioned, and it looks like your bank might be the trustee on this. And he looked into it and said, yep, absolutely. I can tell you, there's things they can disclose to, things they can't. And he said, yep, I can tell you that this, will almost certainly be coming to market in the near future. And we haven't, a broker hasn't been chosen yet. We'll let you know when a broker has been chosen, put you in touch. Nothing else we can say right now, which you want to make sure you're not ever pressuring people to disclose things they can't. So this had been on our radar for probably close to a year. And then and the broker that was chosen, we had a phenomenal relationship with, have done multiple deals with them for challenging deals. And these trustee deals are really tough deals. So in this example, there's a third-party property management company, and they kind of know what's going on, but not really. The trustee may or may not be disclosing things to them. The trustee may not even disclose to the property management company that the asset's for sale. They may have different rules they have to follow based on the language in the trust, or whatever it might be. They're very clumsy sales. You're not working with a motivated, competent actor the way you would with a live person. And so like when we did our unit walkthroughs under due diligence, that was the first time the broker had ever been inside the units. And this is a Class D asset. So there were a lot of discoveries with those unit walkthroughs. The trustee had never walked through the asset. the appraiser had never walked through every single unit. They probably saw like maybe one unit, maybe the best unit or something like that. And these are all very normal things to encounter in a trustee sale. So very unusual life cycle that the owner, the seller, has never been in the asset, and they might see it for the first time after you, the buyer, have been inside the asset. That's unfortunately normal in a trustee situation.
So it was listed for what you said, 2.6. Okay. And the whole goal is you need to hit that appraised price. How did you
Correct.
lock up this contract? Was it a matter of like, hey, we have the buying power and the track record of closing? You know, we're structuring a very competitive deal. We're putting down earnest money. Like, how did you structure your contract to win the deal?
Great question. So again, just some tips for people who might be buying trustee sales. A normal rational buyer, our offer was all cash, because again, this is a really distressed asset. There were roof leaks. There was a lot of issues with it, and it was unclear to me if it would even be eligible for financing at all. Probably not. A rational seller would look at our cash offer and say, well, yeah, I'd take a lower purchase price because I know a cash offer is more likely to close. But a trustee actually might have an obligation to say, wait, there's another offer that's financed, even though the financing's super shaky. I actually have an obligation to take that higher offer. So we have a private equity fund. We had a fully funded private equity fund. So we had a proof of funds that shows we've got 15 million in cash in the bank. So 2.65 million, no big deal to offer that. And it really didn't get us much traction with the seller. It got us traction with the broker, but not much traction with the seller. We actually offered a lower, offer price at first, discounting that all cash offer, and the broker brought that to the seller, and the seller said, "Sorry, this doesn't mean anything to us. Being an all cash offer on an asset you can't finance." Because again, it's just that's the thought process of a trustee. And we eventually raised our offer to, I think, match the other offer that they had received. There's typically a fiduciary obligation to publicly market that asset. So even if you could say, hey, we had appraised at this, Nick and Elaine are willing to offer the appraised value all cash, no contingencies, guaranteed close. They can't take that offer. They have to publicly market it. And being a knockdown, they didn't get a ton of interest. I mean, it's a very tough property for sure. Not a lot of people who are interested in this property, and it's got huge problems to solve. So like a big developer that would want to come and put a $50 million apartment building in doesn't want to mess with all the headaches that come with a fully occupied Class D property. And the kind of people that want to deal with those headaches probably don't want to knock it down and redevelop it. So there's not a big market for that asset in the condition it was in. So ultimately we went up to the full asking price. We did $100,000 of fully refundable earnest money. We offered a 30-day close, but said we could probably close faster than that. So we just did 15 days of due diligence, and we actually closed in 2 weeks on the asset. And these things were like sort of appealing to the trustee, not as appealing as you think it might be, but we went with this just like crazy aggressive offer, trying really hard to win the deal. Because for us, we knew that if we could get in there and run our business plan, this asset would be worth so much more than the as is appraised value. So this was really a question of like, we need to buy this thing before more buyers, get into the ring, and what can we do to lock this up as quickly as we possibly can.
Awesome. Okay, so you get your offer in, it's accepted. When did you walk the units, and were you able to walk every single unit?
No, we were not. So we had walked one unit before we wrote our offer. They had like one vacant unit, and that was it, just so we could get some impression of it. And again, the brokers had never walked a unit. The owner, the trustee, had never walked a unit. Only the third party property management company, who was kind of in the dark here. Those are the only people who had been inside these units. And so we got our offer accepted. Went under our due diligence contingency, and we walked the units. And we got there. We started walking units, and I think like the third unit, there was probably like a 6 foot by 10 foot hole in the ceiling when we walked into the unit. And you see this all the time in D-class properties. You walk in, and tenant's a very nice person, very sane, reasonable person. And I walk in, and I'm like, whoa, there's no ceiling in this unit. And they're like, yeah, there was a roof leak or something. So I just put buckets out, and yeah, it's been like that for, I don't know, maybe a year. I don't know. And just the ceiling kept coming down. So I just kind of like cut back the sheetrock, and it's okay now. There's no more sheetrock. Like they're living in kind of an insane circumstance, but they've gotten acclimated to it. And the being in a trustee situation, I'm sure the property management company said, hey, we need to fix the roof. And when your property's in limbo, they don't have the ability to inject, $25,000 to do a roof or whatever is needed. So the property can deteriorate very quickly. There was another unit we entered where there was, active drug use happening in the unit. As we walked in, there was, foils and whatnot, paraphernalia everywhere. There's another unit where there was an active bed bug situation. And so you never want to, walk into that unit. So we kind of opened the door and just like kind of stuck our head in, kind of like leaned in, looked around, and got a feel for what the unit was like. There was another unit where there was a section of the rear wall that was kind of cut out, again, due to a roof leak in a different location. And then we got up on the roof, like, what's going on with these roof leaks? And we got up there, and there was about 6 inches of standing water on the whole roof. So I don't know how the building hadn't like collapsed. And eventually it kind of pushed the roof down. It became kind of like a bowl. So more and more water would accumulate. Just there wasn't adequate drainage. So we got up on top of the roof with my roof inspector, and we're like, whoa, maybe we should get off this roof. Maybe this thing could go at any moment. Who knows? It probably got that way over the course of many years, and then finally kind of hit a breaking point or something, right around the time when the owner passed away. At the end of the day, these were considered to be knockdowns. They were just not taken care of. So there was a litany of surprises that weren't that surprising when we walked through the units. But again, like a sane, reasonable market actor would say, hey, you're buying the dirt, not the building. So I'm not going to give you any discounts for any property conditions. But we went back and said, hey, we've identified $1 million of deficiencies in these buildings. We need a credit of, say, 250,000. I don't remember the credit, but somewhere I think we're under contract at 2.65 and we closed at 2.413. So we got a very substantial adjustment based on due diligence findings, because again, a trustee looks at it and they're like, wow, there is a lot of stuff there that we weren't aware of, and the appraiser never got up on the roof. So the appraiser never saw this huge roof issue. So sure, here's $250,000. Again, working with a trustee, it's a totally different situation. And usually we don't ever really retrade on a deal like that. We don't typically ask for a lot of adjustments as a result of due diligence findings. But in this case, we knew that the trustee would give us those discounts, and there's no reason not to ask for it.
Okay. Very interesting. Okay, so that's all the physical due diligence, and I'm sure, was there any surprises on the economic or financial due diligence? I mean, you've already talked about the retrade, but was that even, a factor here?
So we found that there can be really surprising things that happen when you're buying like a Class A professionally managed property in terms of economic due diligence. Sometimes the seller is very sophisticated, and we looked at one deal recently, and they miscounted the parking spaces and misaccounted for them in a way that favored their financials. You tend to see those sorts of things very frequently on, we've got 10 furnished units that get these premium rents that they don't disclose are furnished, those types of things. When you're buying a Class D asset, you just don't have those problems. It's a very unsophisticated seller typically, and the big challenge is just the asset itself, the physical asset, and the tenants that tend to go with that that challenged asset. So there really weren't any surprises on the economic side. There were people who weren't paying the rent. That's not a super big surprise. There were people who weren't necessarily under a lease agreement. Not a big surprise. All the leases were timed to basically terminate at the same time, which is a very strange thing to do. But again, we're really totally unsurprised by a lot of those things. At the end of the day, just as an example of that, we basically gave them a prorated, rent calculation, security deposit transfers, and I would say they kind of lacked the sophistication to do a thorough calculation on their end. So they just kind of went with our number. That can often be kind of a tooth and nail negotiation with a sophisticated seller as to how you calculate all those pennies, because they do add up quite a bit. And at the very end, I mentioned bed bugs, and remediating bed bugs can be extraordinarily expensive in an apartment building. And that tenant was denying access to the bed bug remediation, exterminator. So, whoa, there's a lot of issues there. So we basically just said to the seller on kind of like a handshake agreement, hey, we have no idea what this is going to cost or how long it's going to take or what's going to be involved. Will you reimburse us for whatever those expenses are, whatever reasonable expenses there might be? And they said, sure. I would never do that with a normal seller, but with a trustee, like, for them to go back and like get the approval to adjust the purchase price, even $10,000 could be weeks of delays. And then they might have to do a study as to how much it actually cost, so just, hey, hopefully it's not very expensive, but if it is, will you pay us back? And they said, sure. And that was it. So you just have to be really careful when dealing with trustees in that regard. There were really no surprises, fortunately, on the economic side.
Now, I mean, okay, so the lending piece, there was no lending. You closed all cash, correct? Okay.
Correct.
Now that takes care of like the qualifying, right? Like you didn't have to qualify to get a loan, but you still need to carry insurance on the property, correct? Okay.
Correct.
How on earth did a property like this qualify for insurance? Please educate us.
Fantastic question. So we have a totally different approach to insurance. I mean, we do a lot of things different from the industry standard. So I'd say your typical, multifamily operator, they go to an insurance broker. They have, aggressive negotiations with multiple insurance carriers. They try to just squeeze every penny they can out of that. This can sound crazy. We use State Farm for all of our insurance policies. We use one agent for all of our insurance policies, and I think that guy is very motivated to get us the best possible rate he possibly can. I mean, we are his whole business, or we're, the vast majority of his business. I mean, he is calling us every day saying, hey, is there anything I can do for you today? Did you buy any properties? You worried about any rates or anything like that? And it is invaluable when it comes to something like this, because we buy a ton of distressed properties. Most of the properties that we buy, they need a lot of TLC, and it's very difficult to get an insurance policy. So our State Farm, we've got such a great relationship with them that they know we're going to take care of things. And we've proven that over and over again. So at first, maybe they required some impounds, escrows, bids from contractors that are set aside, that sort of thing. And over time, they figured out, nope, these guys are good for it. So they'll underwrite the policy as though everything is fixed. And then they'll check back in pretty aggressively, like every couple of weeks. They'll be like, hey, Nick, did you fix the roof? Hey, Nick, is that bed bug thing still going on? So they don't let anything slide, but they do give us a grace period to get in there and fix the things that make it otherwise ineligible for insurance. Because this is a property that would have otherwise been ineligible for insurance. Absolutely.
All right. Normally I would dive into the capital raising side of things, but before we tackle that, like, what is your overarching business plan here? Because I think we need to understand that before we talk about how you raised capital for this deal.
Absolutely. So this is a great, pro tip for anyone out there. Everywhere in the country, there is this myth, and I see this over and over again, that an owner is going to buy a building that's in a great location, and they're going to pretty aggressively neglect that building because eventually they're going to knock it down. It's in such a great spot that eventually they're going to knock it down and build a new building. So why would they, put money into that building? And most of the time, 90% of the time, that redevelopment thing, it never comes to be. There's just so many stars have to line. We have about $50 million in ground up construction stuff that's coming out of the ground, right this second. In addition to, we've done 200 to 300 rehabs in the last year. So we know development really well. It's tough for us. Like, it's so tough to make development happen. And people don't realize how difficult redevelopment is. So people buy, kind of a C class or even a B class property that's in an amazing location, say, okay, I'm just going to hold on to this thing for a year or two, and then eventually we'll redevelop it. 10 years later, that building has really kind of gotten into a bad spot, and it's not been redeveloped, and it's probably not going to ever be redeveloped by that particular owner. And eventually you can buy these buildings for the value of the dirt and get the building for free. And what we do is we unknock these things down. We'll buy buildings where, like, the utilities have been ripped out, where, I mean, they have been prepared for demolition, but that demolition hasn't taken place, and they haven't gotten to a place where we'd have to like reapply for a certificate of occupancy. These are most of the best deals we have ever done. Are deals where, we kind of bought a knockdown, and then we did a renovation to it to get it back to where it's, it's not an A-class property by any means. Today I'm going to say it's gone from a D- to a C+, something like that. And we spent all of a couple $100,000 on that. It didn't take much to go do paint and flooring, fix the roofs. We have some clever solutions for how we were able to fix the roof. We actually cut a giant hole in the middle, like a sink drain, and then ran some piping out to drain that. There's no way you can make the roof not like a bowl, right? So you just put a drain in the middle of the bowl. That was a very clever engineering thing we figured out. It doesn't take much money to get these things back to life, depending on how bad they are. And so right this second, we've been able to take this asset from in-place NOI was about $85,000. So on a cap rate basis, we paid an absurd amount of money for this asset. As of today, with the money that's on the rent roll, we've gone from 85,000 to 212,000 in about 7 months.
Oh,
There's not a lot of assets where you can pull off that kind of delta. Things have to be pretty bad in order for you to do that. And we have a very clear path. We'll be at about 283,000 in NOI, probably within about 9 months from now, somewhere in that territory. So from 85 to 285 in a year. And so I recommend anyone out there take a look at those assets that are knockdown assets, and look at them. What would it take to breathe some new life into them and to get them to be probably not a Class A asset, but stable, and they will produce insane cash flow. And in our case, our business model is a BRRRR business model. So we typically buy something, do some pretty deep value add to it, some huge renovations, put new tenants in it, refinance and repeat. So this asset, we're coming up on our refinance window. We actually just submitted financials to our lender a couple of days ago. The lender that brought this deal to us, we submitted our financials and said, hey, we've got 212K in NOI today. We're on track for 285K very soon. What can we do for debt? So with any luck, we'll get very close to a full cash out refi. I think we'll be eligible for 2.7 million, 2.6 million, up to 2.8 million in debt on kind of today's lending terms. So we're able to do a cash out refi today, get our money back out, so we don't have almost $3 million sitting in this asset. We're at an infinite rate of return. And then, I'm meeting with architecture groups. I've met with, 3 different architecture firms to get, massing studies and site surveys and stuff. But, it's going to be probably a 2-year process minimum to start redevelopment on this. Anytime you're redeveloping urban core real estate like this, it's very time consuming. And if that thing's burning a hole in your pocket in the meantime, you're typically in a hurry to make bad decisions. You don't want to hold out to get subsidies from the government or to get the best possible zoning or density waiver or whatever. So if that thing is cash flowing while you're working on redeveloping it, you are made in the shade. That is just the strongest possible place you could be. Warren Buffett defines the best profile for any investment is one that produces a regular, steady amount of return that's nothing sexy, but has this chance for a wild upside. And that's exactly what we've positioned ourselves for. That's a very unique profile, but if you look, you can find it or create it in lots of ways. That's exactly what we've got here is, rates are high, costs are still high. It does not make sense for us to break ground on this thing today, but we're going to spend the next several years working on it and stacking up all the advantages we can in our favor. And maybe 5 years from now, we redevelop that site, we knock down our $3 million apartment building. And this is a really, really desirable site. So it would probably support, a $50 million plus building, 150 to 200 units is what the architects tell me of. Class A high rise. It has very desirable zoning that lets us go high. There's no unit density restrictions. There's very forgiving, floor area ratio restrictions. There's basically 0 setbacks. It's very intensive zoning. And so our business plan is basically to get to a cash out refi, to get all of our money back out of that thing as quickly as we possibly can, and then just run it as a class, C, maybe on a good day with beautiful weather, B minus, but probably not, maybe a C plus asset for as long as it takes, and then eventually redevelop it.
So I'm curious then, when you go to do the redevelopment, you have now an outstanding loan. Do you use your construction loan to pay off the other loan?
Absolutely. Yep. So we, time value of money is very, very high for us. So if we can go get, a bank loan at, 7%, 8%, people complain about how high interest rates are. They're 8% to 4%. For us, our time value money is about 25%. That's just how we internally value our capital. So for us, that's a trivial swing. It makes the deals a lot harder to do, but on a deal like this, it does not matter if the bank debt is at 5% or 9% or whatever. We're still going to be able to get at least most of our cash back out, and now we're sitting on something that has a $10 million plus equity upside at some point in the future. We don't know when, we don't know how, but it's almost inevitable that there will be this, probably, $10 million plus equity upside event at some point in the future. So that bank loan, having that in the meantime, that just kind of, cranks up our IRR, increases our velocity of capital in the short time. That actually directly feeds into our whole strategy with this thing. So we have a very large private equity fund that this asset is kind of a very small piece of that fund. And when you have a fund that big, you need to have a lot of money set aside, like a schedule of liquidity essentially. And so we had kind of too much liquidity available when we bought this thing. We had money sitting in T-bills earning 5%, which is great. And we bought this thing, we're thinking, man, we could just buy it with cash and we could probably get all that cash back out, or most of it, in, less than a year, 9 months. And right about then is probably when we would need that cash, that liquidity, for kind of the future business plan of that private equity fund. So we went from a 5% T-bill to a 100% IRR. I'd have to do the math, but I'm sure we're at like a triple digit IRR on this particular asset. It's such a small asset, you could never like launch a private equity fund, or even a single asset real estate syndication would be kind of silly to launch for a $2.6 million deal. But to be able to have a private equity fund where you can just kind of put that thing into that bucket you already have, it is this will be one of the better deals we've ever done. And we did it with kind of couch cushion money, in our private equity fund. That's a very privileged thing to say, that $2.65 million. But truthfully, it was literally just the money that was sitting around in reserve, in our private equity fund, because we had a feeling 2024 was going to be a tough year. Back in 2022, we had that feeling. So we're like, we need to set aside this money. And now we've got this extra money in 2023. Hey, here's something to just basically consume that excess capital temporarily.
I love how you put it. Turned over the couch cushions to find some change there. So, okay. So how did you structure this with your investors in the private equity fund?
Yeah, so we have a radically different model in our private equity fund. We have no fees whatsoever. There's no acquisition fee, asset management fee, capital event fee, loan recourse fee, disposition fee, marketing promote fee. There's no fees whatsoever. We're very vertically integrated. We own the property management company and stuff. So we do collect a property management fee and a real estate brokerage commission wherever we can. I think I got like a 2% brokerage commission on this one. It's often very difficult to get a brokerage commission on multifamily, but on this one, they were offering a very generous commission split on this particular deal. So that's our income stream there, and we don't make any money. We get no profit from the private equity fund until our investors have gotten a full return of capital, and then it's a 50-50 split after that. So if you pencil that into kind of a calculator, there's very few, if any, scenarios where someone would an LP would come out ahead with a traditional real estate syndication structure where maybe they get a 70 or even 80% split on the equity, but they're paying a full fee load, and they've got this kind of waterfall structure, and it keeps our incentives laser aligned. We have no incentive to go buy a bad deal just to collect a fee or something like that. We're kind of working for free for years until we get that return of capital, and then we get a disproportionate share of the upside if we're able to kind of knock it out of the park, so to speak, which today we have. We tell people to expect a 5-year time frame to return capital, though historically we've been able to achieve that much less. This deal here, we're doing a full return of capital probably in less than a year. I suspect is going to be our outcome. That's a ridiculous outcome. That's very, very unusual. It's happened before. It's happened many times before. But that's not normal. We have other assets that it takes the full 5 years, potentially to return capital. So we just have a private equity fund, a big bucket. It was a $30 million fund. We raised $30 million, and this was just one asset of a large number of assets that went into that fund.
All right. A lot to digest here, guys. There's so many unique things about this deal, and we haven't even talked about the single family properties. What did you do with the single family?
Yeah, there's a couple of houses and there's 2 adjacent lots that go with it. We could probably actually make pretty good money selling parking at those lots because it's just in such a good location. But we've had we've turned over most of the tenants in this building in short order, and we do that with just full love and transparency. We go to the tenants and say, listen, you're living in a class D- asset. It. Some people, I think the tenants, they have this belief that the tenants don't get it. The tenants are smart. If you're living in class D asset, you're living in class D asset. And we tell them, the rent's $700 a month. It's going to be, 1,000 or 1,100 soon. You have to pay the rent and you can't break the law and you have to follow our rules. If you can do those things, we would love to continue to serve you, whatever that looks like. If that doesn't make sense for you, if there's something you're afraid about, like, like, we're going to serve you, help you find a new place to live. We're going to pull up a moving truck, like whatever. There's no judgment in our hearts for someone who's addicted to drugs. Half of my wife's family has passed away from drug overdoses. I grew up in Section 8 housing myself. So these are people we're very eager to serve. But there's a huge amount of activity that goes with that. So turning over, 2/3 of that apartment building in like a 90-day period, that's an extreme amount of activity. Probably not the best time to start selling parking spaces or doing anything clever with the adjacent parcels. We might do that as things quiet down at that asset. We have about 6 units left to lease. I think we've got one rehab left in there. And then those 2 single family homes, we just kind of went to them and said the exact same thing. We did, modest rent increases on those homes. They're actually relatively nice homes. They're 100 years old, but they're relatively nice homes. And we just said, hey, the rents are going to increase a little bit because you're at, ridiculously low rents on these. Again, they're being managed as knockdown properties. We're going to make some improvements if you want. Just let us know. We can renovate the home while you're here. We often do in-place renovations when we do rent escalations for people to stay. Anytime we can do that, we love to do that. That's way better for the tenant, way better for everyone. And both of the original tenants in the single family homes are still there. I personally walk every single unit that we buy, which is a little crazy, but I just think that's something that's my commitment to our investors. I'll get on a plane, I'll do whatever I got to do to go walk every unit. And those homes were in pretty good shape with great tenants. And we just, if we can ever keep someone in place, we do that. So we'll keep those tenants in place and hopefully, keep as many people in place as possible before that property is eventually redeveloped, and all those homes will be knocked down, the apartment buildings will be knocked down, and those adjacent parcels will be excavated and redeveloped.
A lot going on here, Nick. Thank you so much for sharing. I have 2 questions for you before we wrap up. What did you find easy during this process that honestly you thought would be a little bit more difficult? And then what ended up being a little bit more challenging that you thought would be easier?
Fixing the roofs was way easier than I thought it would be. So we've got
Just drain the roof.
yeah, that bowl-shaped roof was surprisingly easy to fix. We've got some absolutely brilliant people on our team, our W-2 staff members, and then contractors. So every building we buy, we have a very different inspection process. So I mean, I'm a former engineer myself, and I have kind of a sharp eye for those things. And then I bring along this inspector, and he's a former biomedical engineer. He worked for NASA for a time. He is just like this savant, gifted person who, for whatever reason, he's a real estate investor. And for whatever reason, he just loves inspecting properties. I mean, it's kind of a fun, like, archaeological kind of thing. So it's not like his bread and butter, but he does, probably, I don't know, 30 or 40 inspections a year or something like that. I'm not sure how many he does, but anytime I call him, he's like, heck yeah, I want to go crawl. And we buy distressed assets. So they're very interesting inspections for him to do. They're not boring inspections. We'll have our team, walk all the units. And if they see something that they want to call out, he'll come, kind of go into that particular unit. And then he'll go walk all the roofs, look at all the mechanicals and stuff. And I remember standing up there on that bowl of a roof with him. I'd climbed up the ladder along with him. And we're just looking at this, like, there is 6 inches of standing water in this roof. And we're both looking at each other like, is this building about to collapse? Like, what's going on here? And we kind of were troubleshooting and, kind of gingerly walking around, like, what's going on? Like, do we need to get our waiters to come up here? And I remember him saying, his name is Jaime, and he's like, Nick, if there is, we're kind of standing in like a sink, aren't we? So could we just like cut a drain? Like, there's probably already a hole in the roof in the unit underneath here. So, and there's pretty big clearances. There's like a crawl space between the roof and where the unit ceiling starts. If we could get enough slope and like some PVC piping and make sure it stays warm, like we could just cut a drain in the center. Is there any way it could be that simple? And ultimately we asked for a very generous, discount there, $250,000. I think we fixed both of the roofs for about $20,000. So we had to get a roofer up there to cut that hole and a plumber to plumb it all. So it's all, again, we have really, really sharp people working for us that were able to come up with a scrappy solution there. So that ended up being way easier than I expected it to be.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing. And was there something that you expected to be harder, or easier, but it actually ended up being more challenging?
Getting it under contract ended up being way harder than I expected. I remember making that offer, and we've bought from a lot of trustees. And so I knew that trustees, they're really fixated on that number. But I'm like, we've got an all cash offer on a building you can't finance. They can't even accept an offer from anyone else, can they? And I was talking to the broker, and he's like, well, they could accept the offer, it'll fall through, and then I bet that buyer could maybe even negotiate them down from there. Like, I'm talking to the listing broker. That's one huge advantage of being an agent, by the way, is you just, you're definitely on different sides. You're negotiating for your team, but it's kind of like when two doctors talk to each other or two engineers talk to each other. Like, there's just a level of rapport that only two brokers can have. Like, you just exchange. It's like, listen, we want to get this deal closed. So what's that going to take? So I'm talking to a listing agent, and he's like, yeah, I mean, technically someone else could buy it and then negotiate the price down, as a result of not being able to finance it. It'll drag out for 6 months, and the seller will be on the hook to pay all those remediations, and ultimately they buy it for less than you're offering. So Nick, if you can just get us the asking price, I don't know if the other buyer would potentially go above asking price or whatever, but surely if the prices are the same, they would go with the cash offer, you would think. If the other buyer had offered 25 grand more, I think the trustee maybe would have accepted that offer. And so ultimately the listing broker did their job, because they got me to increase my offer, right? And I think represented the seller, because they got the seller an all cash offer that they knew was gonna close, whereas that other offer likely was not going to close. But it took, I mean, we'd been working on this thing for like a year. Finally went to a brokerage. The brokerage that was chosen was a brokerage we had a great relationship with. I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to get a great price on it. It's going to work out swimmingly. And it took weeks of kind of nail biting, because we thought this was a fantastic deal. I mean, this thing's worth at least $4 million today. So we've made $1.5 million in the last 7 months on this thing, and that's about where we expected to be. So we were just like, gosh, how can we get this thing closed out? How can we get this thing under contract? And it was unbelievably difficult to get under contract. And then we finally did, we're like, let's close on this thing in 2 weeks. Let's get this thing closed. And, before we lose this fantastic deal.
Oh, Nick, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us here today. I hope everybody hears the various different ways that you can piece together a deal, right? Something that we normally don't hear on the show. If listeners want to learn more about you, how can they do so?
Yeah, anyone here can go to meetblackswan.com. There's a link right there to my calendar, my wife's calendar, and you're welcome to just, block 15 minutes on my calendar if you'd like to chat. If there's anything I can do to provide you with value, if you're interested in investing in our fund, happy to answer any questions there. There's a link to our wait list for our next private equity fund. We've got about 25 million on our wait list for our next fund. We're not buying a lot right now. We're trying to, but prices, it's November 3rd, 2023, and the sellers kind of want this much, and we're only willing to offer this much. So there's a little bit of a gap there right now. But we do think 2024 is going to be a year where there's an extraordinary amount of opportunity, for better or worse, probably more opportunity since, 09. And so we're raising a huge amount of capital to get prepared for that opportunity. So if anyone wants to jump on that wait list right now, there's no cost or obligation to it. You just kind of save your spot in line. You go to meetblackswan.com to do that.
Awesome. Again, Nick, thank you so much for being here today. We look forward to hearing about future deals.
Thank you, Whitney.